I can go all the way back to when I was an 8-year-old girl standing on the stoop of my grandmother's house, and just all I longed to be was a pastor's wife. Isn't that crazy? I think about it, and I think about what I was going through at that time. I was living with my grandparents. My parents were divorced. I didn't know from one day to the next where I was going to wake up. I wondered so many times why my mom didn't want to come home and be with us. But life was just happening, and I just remember my grandparents would take me to church. And so all I wanted to be was a pastor's wife. And then I went through life and just did things that I shouldn't do, acted in ways that I shouldn't have acted. And I lost my gratefulness. I lost my gratefulness to my grandparents who took me to the house of God and put something on the inside of me. I wasn't grateful anymore. See, if you continue to be grateful, it'll keep you out of a lot of trouble. It'll keep your heart right with the Lord. And even those things that as a little girl that God brought me through, and as a young woman God brought me through, and then I ended up, it's a long story and I don't want to go through it all, but Pastor Chris and I get married. We're not living for the Lord. And then he gets saved, then I get saved. And I became grateful. Amen. Thinking about what God brought us through. And then we answered the call to the ministry, and I say that we answered the call to the ministry because when he did, I did. At that time, I thought all I was going to do was sit on the front row with all my kids and say amen and good job. But when he answered, I answered. When he said yes, I said yes. We gave God our yes. And we walked through the years. I was just thinking the other day. Someone asked me, they said, did you ever think that you would be traveling all over the world preaching the gospel? And I first said no, and then I said, wait a minute. Yes, I did. At 8 years old, I was pretending to go all around the world and preach the gospel. At 8 years old. I remember Chris and I in our living room, we hadn't been saved long, and we started digging in the Word. And we said, one of these days, we're going to stand before thousands of people and preach the gospel. One of these days, we're going to go to churches and we're going to preach on marriage, and then we laugh because our marriage was crazy. And we were like, we don't know. But yet we were always grateful for everything God brought us through. I don't ever want to forget what God has brought me through. I refuse to live in shame. I refuse to live in the guilt of it, but I don't ever want to forget. And I think sometimes that's the reason why we struggle lifting our hands in praise. Because we've forgotten. We're not grateful anymore. We don't allow God to remind us, this is where I brought you from. I would encourage you tonight, if you would just remember some of those little things that God's brought you through, those things the prayers that God has answered, you'll find yourself lifting your hands and saying, God, I'm so grateful. God, you're so good. God, I love you. Thank you. And you'll find yourself then in a place to receive the blessing that he has for you. Amen.